You can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't know how to persuade, your ideas will remain foreign. I've seen this dozens of times. People with huge potential but zero influence. Want to change that? Watch until the end. At the end, I'll give you a simple practice that will instantly change the quality of your communication. Why do some people walk into a room and instantly draw attention, even before saying a single word? And why do others, no matter how hard they try, go unnoticed? Why can some say a simple phrase that sparks change in others, while others speak at length, eloquently and loudly, yet their words vanish into the air, leaving no trace? It's not about charisma, not about status. It's about a deeper art, the art of persuasive communication. This paradox became a wake-up call for me, because I was that person, the one with ideas, dreams, aspirations, but lacking something that made people believe in me. Listen, really listen, and change because of it. I searched for the secret, and I found it. First in the words of my mentor, Mr. Schoaf, then in my own experience. Mr. Schoaf once told me, "Jim, if you speak and they don't hear you, it's not their fault. It's your responsibility. Communication isn't what you say, it's what the other person hears." And those words turned my world upside down. Because before, I thought the most important thing was being right, having knowledge, having arguments, but it turns out it's not. The key is being able to deliver. And that's where the magic begins. When you learn to communicate not just with logic, but with energy, depth, presence, you don't just change how people perceive you, you change yourself. You shape a new identity. You become someone people want to listen to. But there's one more thing you need to know. Effective communication is not just a skill for public speakers. It's a foundation for everyone. For the father who wants to raise a strong child, for the manager leading a team, for the salesperson building trust, for the husband or wife seeking true intimacy. It's the skill that shapes the quality of every relationship you have and the level of influence you carry in life. Many people say, "I'm not good at persuasion," but the truth is different. They just don't know how it works. They have sincerity, ideas, even enthusiasm, but no structure, no understanding, no experience. It's like having tools, but not knowing how to use them. And I believe everyone can be taught. So in this video, we'll explore the art of persuasion through the lens of my personal lessons and mistakes. I'll show you how to shape your thoughts so they resonate, how to speak so that people believe you, how to share your ideas, even if you're not a speaker or a leader. And at the end, I'll give you a practical tool you can use today, simple but powerful. Because once you master the power of communication, you're no longer afraid of being heard. You become someone people turn to for words. And those words have the power to change lives. Communication isn't just about transmitting information. It's about creating a space where the other person changes. And effective persuasion doesn't begin with words. It begins with who you are in the moment of the conversation. I'll never forget how early in my career, I was invited to speak to a small group of businessmen. I prepared for a week. I had clear points, statistics, examples. But when I started speaking, something went wrong. People listened politely but without interest. Some started yawning. One man even walked out in the middle of the talk. I was disappointed. It was supposed to work. Why didn't it? After the meeting, I went to Mr. Schoaf. He listened to me, smiled, and asked, "You spoke, Jim, but who were you in that moment? An instructor? A salesperson? A man with notes? Or a man with a mission?" That was my first major realization. Words are worthless without the energy behind them. And that energy isn't theatrics. It's the inner state you speak from. If you're convinced, they'll hear you. If you're just trying to be liked, you'll be politely ignored. So the first level of communication is energetic alignment. You can't persuade someone of something you don't believe yourself. That's a law. People always hear more than words. They read mood, confidence, emotion, and that's what has the greatest impact. Want to be persuasive? First, be convinced yourself. The second key is listening with the intention to understand, not to respond. This is perhaps the deepest influence tool I've discovered. Most people don't listen. They wait for their turn to speak. But true masters, they listen differently. They create space. They make the other person feel, you are seen, you are heard. I've often said, people open up not because of what you say, but because of what you hear. The ability to be present, to look someone in the eye, not interrupt, that's magic. In those moments, trust is born, and without trust, persuasion is impossible. But listening isn't everything. There's another secret, asking the right questions. Not just what do you think, but what's important to you about this? What's holding you back? What would be possible if? These kinds of questions open hearts. because they target not logic, but the person's inner experience. I like the metaphor. Communication is not a duel, but a dance. Not a battle of arguments, but a movement in shared rhythm. You're not trying to win the conversation, you're seeking a place to meet, and in that lies the greatest power. But let's talk about another component, the structure of a persuasive conversation. It's not improvisation, it's a craft. There's a sequence I've used for decades that never fails. Start with pain or desire. What's troubling the person? What do they long for? Show that you understand them, even better than they understand themselves. Offer a new perspective. Make them see the situation differently. Present a simple solution. Finish with the emotion of belief. I know you can do this. This isn't magic, it's psychology. And it works when you work from sincerity. Because another principle, truth sounds the most persuasive. If you're selling something, believe in it. If you're recommending something, walk that path yourself. If you're leading, go first. And here's another key. Influence isn't in the strength of your voice, but in the purity of your intent. People sometimes ask me, Jim, how can I become charismatic? And I say, stop trying to be charismatic. Be clear, calm, and deeply interested in the other person. That is true charisma. When I spoke on stage to thousands, I always imagined I was talking to just one person. There were 5,000 in the room, but I was speaking to her. I had the feeling, maybe you came here today for this. And that attention, that energy, that internal focus made my words stronger. But that's not all. Because even when you speak well, you can lose your influence if you don't manage your state. Persuasiveness isn't just logic, and it's not just words. It's calm. It's being deeply rooted in your truth. It's the ability to stay grounded when you're tested. I learned this through experience, after many emotional mistakes. One moment became a lifelong lesson for me. A businessman accused me of lying right in the middle of my speech. I could have been outraged, defensive, or retaliated. But I paused, looked him in the eye, and calmly said, "Interesting, why do you feel that way?" It changed the whole dynamic, because real influence is control over your reaction. Now we're approaching the practical part, but don't rush. The best is yet to come. Soon I'll reveal the second level of the art of persuasion, how to speak so not just thoughts, but values change. But for now, ask yourself, what part of all this is already within you, and what could you still develop? There's a second level to the art of persuasion, and it's no longer just about how to speak. It's about how to shift a person's view of themselves, the world, and what's possible. You can persuade someone to buy a product, and that's fine. But if you can persuade them to believe in themselves, that's true art. That's what I saw in Mr. Schaff. He didn't just teach business. He spoke in a way that made me see myself differently. His words reached deeper than logic. They touched my core. I remember him once saying, "Jim, you're not a tree. You can change." A simple phrase maybe, but it turned my world upside down. Until that moment, I believed my circumstances determined my direction, but suddenly it was clear I could choose to change my course. And you know why his words stuck? Because they were spoken with love, clarity, and belief in me. That's another key. If you want to persuade, learn to believe in someone more than they believe in themselves, and let that belief echo through every word. This isn't a technique, it's a state of being. And people feel it, especially those tired of criticism, indifference, and superficial support. I've seen people bloom just because someone spoke to them as potentially great individuals. Not as problems, not as not enough, but as people who already have power within. They just haven't activated it yet. And that change, it begins in a conversation, in something as simple as, "I know you're capable of more." I remember a young man who came up to me after a talk in Texas. He was shy, trembling. He said he worked in a warehouse and dreamed of becoming a speaker like me, but he was scared. I looked at him and replied, "I worked in a warehouse too. I was scared too, but I started small, and one day everything changed. Don't fear your fear. Start by talking to one person." 3 years later, he wrote me a letter. "I now speak to hundreds, and it all started with your words." That's the essence of influence through persuasion, when your presence becomes a mirror in which others see themselves as stronger. Now let's go deeper. There are people who speak correctly, but their words carry no weight. And there are those who speak simply, but every word lands with impact. Why? Because they speak from experience, not from a book. People always hear when you speak from what you've lived. That's why I've always shared my journey. From a farm in Idaho, through debt, fear, and insecurity, to the stage, to business, to freedom. Not to boast, but to connect. Because when someone hears, "He was like me," they begin to think, then maybe I can too. And that's the most persuasive argument of all. The ability to persuade is also the ability to turn pain into hope. When someone shares a problem, don't rush to offer a solution. First, acknowledge their pain, feel it, name it. Say, I understand, that's not easy, but you know what? Only then offer a new vision. Because persuasion isn't pressure, it's lifting someone's gaze. When I was learning public speaking, I discovered something strange. The less I tried to impress, the more powerfully people responded. Because impressing comes from above, influencing comes heart to heart. And that level of communication doesn't depend on rhetoric, it depends on authenticity. Once I had a talk at a company full of people tired of motivational shows. I didn't start with jokes or high energy. I simply said, I know you're tired. Sometimes I feel like giving up too. But I'm here because I remember change comes when we choose not to quit. Sometimes it's just one more day. And the silence in the room shifted. People felt I wasn't performing. I was just with them. And that's the most persuasive thing. Now let's go even deeper. Real influence isn't convincing someone to buy or winning an argument. It's planting an idea that grows even when you're no longer around. It's like planting a tree. You don't see the roots grow, but they do. That's why I don't just teach how to talk. I teach how to create an inner movement in someone. To do that, you must speak not just to the mind, but to the spirit. You must reach not just logic, but hope, not just calculation, but belief. And that's what separates communication masters from just good speakers. And one more thing, don't be afraid of silence. In communication, the strongest part is often not the words, but the pause. When you make a statement and wait. When you don't rush to fill the silence, because in the silence, an inner response is born. Sometimes to persuade, you must say less, but say it at the right moment. Now, my friend, pause for a moment. Recall if there was ever a phrase that changed you. Who said it? What was their tone? Why did it stay with you? That is the essence of influence, and you can be the one who speaks such words, not to teach, but to uplift. Because true communicators are gardeners of inner transformation. We're now approaching the third part, where I'll show how communication shapes not just relationships, but your position in life. How to speak not to plead, but to lead. Not to convince, but to ignite. But first ask yourself, am I persuading with words or with presence? We've reached the highest level of the art of persuasion influence through presence. This is when, even before you open your mouth, people already sense you're different. You have something, not because of your suit, not because of your status, but because of the energy of your integrity. I discovered this level by accident. After a major talk, a man came up to me. He didn't say, your words were powerful. He said, you stood in a way that made me want to become better. That made me think, maybe the most persuasive thing isn't what we say, but how we live. Because persuasion begins before the conversation. It starts with how you enter a room, how you carry yourself, how you look someone in the eye, how you listen, how you respond when interrupted. People are always reading everything, especially body language. I remember once speaking to a room where half the audience was skeptical. One of those moments when you can feel you're being tested. And you know what gave me strength? Not gestures, not rhetoric, but my internal state. I don't need to prove anything. I simply am, and I believe in what I'm saying. That state, that is influence. To speak persuasively, you must be persuasive as a person, and that's not about being loud or emotional. It's about depth, calm, and the strength of your intent. It's about your words and your life being in harmony, because if they aren't, people will feel the disconnect. And inauthenticity is the death of influence. Mr. Schoaf taught me this early on. He said, Jim, your word means nothing if your life goes in a different direction. I remembered that. And that's why I never taught anything I hadn't lived. Because only what you've lived carries weight. There's a saying, people forget what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And it's absolutely true. If after a conversation with you, a person feels stronger, you've persuaded them, even if you didn't make a single argument. Because real persuasion is the transfer of strength, not information. That's why I always say, don't aim to win a conversation. Aim for the other person to feel like they've won in their own decision after speaking with you. That's a different level. And it's the level that builds long-term relationships, loyalty, and respect. One more thing, your communication is always doing one of two things. It's either building or breaking. There's no neutral conversation. You're either building a bridge or a wall. And that depends not just on the words, but on the tone, the emotional code, even a glance. Sometimes the same phrase, "I'm with you," can feel like support or like a formality. That's why I always say, don't just train your words, train the heart you speak from. I once said, communication is not primarily a technique, it's an ethic. Because if your goal is to persuade for yourself, people will feel it. But if your goal is to persuade for the good of the other, people will listen even if you're not perfect. It's the difference between manipulation and influence. Manipulation is speaking so that the person does what you want. Influence is speaking so that the person wants to do it themselves. And that second path, it's longer, deeper, but 100 times more effective. Now let me speak directly to you. You watching this video. Maybe you don't see yourself as a communicator. Maybe you've never spoken in public. Maybe you're a shy person, but I want you to hear me. You already have everything you need to speak with influence. Because real influence starts with truth, with saying what you truly feel, with being honest, simple, and open, with first hearing the other person, then responding. And one more thing, the most persuasive people are those who can admit when they don't know, admit when they're wrong, ask questions instead of giving advice. Because true strength is born in vulnerability. Once I had a conversation with a teenager who had lost faith in himself. He was angry, withdrawn. I didn't try to fix him. I just said, I was once disappointed too. I felt like I'd never break free. But then someone saw something more in me. And you know what? I see that in you right now. And he cried and said, "No one's ever talked to me like that before." That's influence. So let me give you the simplest formula for persuasive communication. Be present. Real attention is the rarest resource. Speak from experience, not from rightness, but from what you've lived. Ask more than you assert. Questions open the heart. Look through eyes of belief, not in yourself, in your listener. Be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Honesty is power. And now we're standing at the threshold of the practical part. Just a little more, and you'll receive 5 specific questions to help you assess how persuasive you really are in life, work, and relationships. But first, a brief reminder. Everything you've just heard means nothing if it stays only in your head. Communication is a dialogue, and dialogue begins with action. So in the next section, I'll ask you 5 questions that will reveal your personal growth zone. Answer them quickly, intuitively, without overthinking. And remember, this isn't a test, it's a mirror. Then later after the video, return to them to see where your true strength lies and where your untapped potential is waiting to be unlocked. Now it's time to act. Your moment has come. Not mine, not the videos, yours. Because you didn't just show up to watch another talk, you came to change something. And if you've made it this far with me, then something inside you is already ripening. It's time to look in the mirror. I'm about to ask you 5 questions. They're simple, but if you answer them honestly, you'll gain a new perspective. Where you are and where you can grow. Answer on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 means not at all about me, and 10 means yes, this is my life right now. Don't pause the video, don't overanalyze, just listen and feel. Your first answer is the truest. First question. How confidently do you express your opinion in difficult situations, not aggressively, not passively, but with respect for yourself and for the other? Think about it. If your opinion is a candle, does it stay lit in the wind of criticism? I usually stay quiet or back off, and I speak with clarity and calm, even when it's hard. Second question, how sincerely do people listen to you? Not out of politeness, but in a way that you feel they truly hear you, because a voice that comes from depth always touches people. I'm often ignored. People listen closely, and my words leave a mark. Third question, how well do you hear others? Not just wait for your turn to speak, but truly hear what's behind the words. It's like listening to rain, not just noise, but drops. I often interrupt or don't fully engage. I listen so deeply that people open up on their own. Fourth question, how much does your communication inspire others to act? Not just to agree, but to change, move, decide. That's the power of a leader. Not to lead people, but to awaken their own strength. My words rarely move anyone. After talking to me, people take action. Fifth question, how aligned is your speech with your life? Are your words your truth or just a polished shell? Like music and the musician, does it all sound in harmony? I sometimes say things I don't live. I live what I say, and people can feel it. Done? Good. Look at your answers. Where are you now? What's your average score? Don't judge yourself. This isn't a report card. It's a starting point. We've all been a 3 at some point. I have too. But I decided and started growing. Here's what's next. Come back to these questions after the video. Take 10 minutes. Write down your answers. Look at yourself from the outside. And most importantly, choose one question that struck you. Then challenge yourself. How can I raise this score by just 1 point in the next 7 days? Because growth isn't leaps, it's micro movements. It's like adjusting the radio dial, a little to the right and the sound becomes clearer. Same with communication, a little more attention, a little more honesty, and your influence grows. And now, if this video truly resonated with you, let me ask you for something. Click the thumbs up. Not for me, it's a signal. Yes, I'm here, I'm ready to grow. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because what's coming will be deeper, more practical, more real. And most importantly, comment below. Which of the 5 questions gave you the biggest insight, and which one did you decide to start working on right now? Yes, right now, not later, because later is the most dangerous word in personal growth. Start with yourself, with one word, one conversation, one decision, and watch how your world begins to change. Remember, communication isn't just about getting your point across. It's about influencing, shaping, uplifting, leading. And most importantly, doing it with kindness, strength, and dignity, because that's exactly what the world needs today. Not those who shout louder, but those who radiate inner clarity. Not those who strike with words, but those who heal with silence. And here we are at the finish line, but truthfully, this is only the beginning, because the real conclusion doesn't happen here, in the video. It happens out there, in your life. In that first new dialogue where you speak differently than before. In the phrase you say with clarity, without hesitation. In that conversation where instead of the usual yes or sorry, you finally say, this is my position. Communication isn't a technique, it's your extension. It's who you are extended into your words, your gaze, your silence. So remember, everything you say says something about you. I once heard the phrase, speak as if your words will stay with someone forever. At first it moved me, then it scared me, because I remembered how many times I'd said something in anger, how many times I stayed silent when I should have offered support, how often I hid behind a joke when I needed to speak for real. But then I remembered something else. How many times simple words changed my life, how Mr. Shoff's phrase, work harder on yourself than you do on your job, became my compass. How you're not a tree you can change gave me freedom. How there's more in you, I repeated to others, and they began to see it for themselves. Words have power, but only when you take responsibility for them, not just for what you say, but how you say it, and for where it comes from. Fear or love, control or respect, truth or the desire to influence. I want you to never forget one simple truth. In every conversation, you're planting either doubt or belief, fear or hope, distance or connection, and that choice is always yours, not the other person's, not the emotions, yours in full awareness. And to be direct, the world today is starving, not for more words. There are already too many. The world is starving for real voices, voices unafraid to be gentle, unashamed to be honest, not hidden behind masks, not forceful, but inviting. Maybe you're thinking, I'm not a speaker, I'm not a leader. My words won't change anything, but that's not true. You know why? Because the biggest changes in people's lives don't come from speeches, they come from conversations. One conversation can put someone back on track, lift them from the edge, wake them from sleep, restore their faith in themselves. So today, when this video ends, I ask you to do one thing. Look at the people in your life and ask yourself, is there someone waiting for a real conversation with me? Maybe your child. Maybe your father, whom you haven't truly spoken to in a long time. Maybe a friend who's fading because it's been too long since they heard, I'm here. Or maybe that person is you. And the most persuasive conversation is the one you've long needed to have with yourself. No excuses, no but, just honesty. And if you're wondering, where do I start? Here's your starting point. Begin with this phrase. I see you, I hear you, you matter. Even if it's just to the mirror. I've always believed the most persuasive person isn't the one who can convince others. It's the one who has already convinced themselves of their worth, their strength, their right to speak. And here's one more thing I want to leave you with as a final chord. If you want to be someone who is heard, become someone who listens deeper. Because the greatest gift is not a speech that gets applause, it's a word that arrives at the right moment and gives someone permission to be themselves. Remember, Your voice is an instrument, not a weapon. Your sincerity is stronger than any argument. Your silence can sometimes speak louder than words. And if today's journey meant something to you, hold on to that flame. Pass it on. Speak in a way that reminds people who they are. And be silent in a way that makes others feel safe to be real beside you. Because that is the true art of persuasion, not to win, but to touch. And finally, let me say this simply and sincerely. I believe that within you is a voice the world is waiting for. Don't change it, don't hide it, don't shrink it, just let it speak the way only you can. Thank you for being here, and may your next conversations be the best you've ever had, not because you've become more eloquent, but because you've become more authentic.